Hello, lovelies. You're listening to episode 50 of the Broken Enchantments podcast, written and read by Elizabeth Wheatley. That's me. I hope you enjoy this week's episode. Be sure to check out my Patreon for next week's episode, now available. You can check out the links below. Happy listening! Janir sat alone at the end of the bench and watched the other Argetallams. They were all piled into the banquet hall of the mansion, serving as the Argetallam barracks, making use of a broad oak table that hadn't rotted away thanks to being indoors. The warriors were almost partying. The high windows had been filled with alabaster, sliced paper thin to let in a surreal amber light. Janir wished she could see the room on a sunny day. A dressed pig turned slowly above the leaping flames in the fire pit, tended by sooty pages. The tantalizing aroma of cooking meat diffused the air. The Argetallams had all traded their leather armor for more relaxed clothes, though every one of them still had carcotton fastened at their belts. Janir petted the soft fur of her jerkin again. For once, her feet were warm inside her wolfskin boots. Her father and Kanistreth mingled with the warriors at the far end of the hall. She didn't expect them to come her way, but it was a comfort to know her father was close. Lucan was nowhere to be found. She closed her eyes and savored the warmth of the room. After the cold trek to Valmahken, she was finally able to appreciate the heat. "Hungry?" Cerilius stomped up behind her. "Yes," Janir answered, a little taken aback that he would ask. "Here." He handed her a tin plate heaped with rosy pork and half a loaf of bread soaking in the meat juices. "Thank you." A little surprised, Janir accepted the plate. Cerilius had already claimed a spot on the bench beside her and gone to work on his own food. Amilla and Canicade plopped themselves down on her left. Canicade settled in easily, almost hip to hip at her side as if they had known one another for years. "At least this weather's good for something," Amilla mused, nibbling at her meat. "Food doesn't spoil nearly as fast as back home." "Enjoy it for now," Cerilius interjected. "There's no telling how soon this abundance of provisions may end." Janir bit into the warm pork. They had been on rations of hard bread and jerked beef during their journey, and it was a great pleasure to eat her fill instead of just her portion. "Always a stack of sweet cakes, aren't you, Cerilius?" Canicade chuckled. Across the room, a group of snow-splashed Mortanas tromped in from patrol. They quickly joined the queue in front of the boar, joking and dusting snow from each other's armor. Lucan passed, and they saluted on recognizing him. "Did any of you know my previous guards?" Janir searched the faces of the 3 Argetallams around her. "The ones who died?" Canicade stopped chewing. Amilla looked to Cerilius. Cerilius swallowed what he'd been chewing. "I did not. Have you asked your aunt or Lord Father?" Picking apart her meat, Janir nodded. "I asked my aunt. She refuses to tell me." "Then you shall have to ask her. I'm sorry." "So none of you knew? They were assigned to guard the crown princess, I would think." Her head rattled as if a pike had slammed into her temple. Janir was sure her head knocked sideways. "Milady?" Cerilius reached over in concern. Amilla straightened in her seat. "Janir?" "I think I'm fine," Janir grated. "Just fine. Breathing slowly, she concentrated on inhaling and exhaling, her train of thought disregarded. Janir woke to something pressing on her shoulder. The cold nipped at her nose, toes, and the ear that was upwards. Amilla's level breathing came from the bottom bunk. Her cousin must have come in after Janir was asleep. Groggily opening her eyes, Janir squinted in the darkness. She found herself staring into a narrow, pointed face with a wiggling pink nose. The rat blinked unconcernedly and sniffed the air. Janir screamed and bolted upright. Sputtering incoherently, she batted at the rat with her blankets as the rodent casually disappeared off the edge of Janir's bed, still not the least concerned. Janir threw her topmost blanket, the one the rat had walked on, after the pale tail that vanished under the door. Amilla leapt out of bed, Carcotton at the ready. "What is it?" "A rat!" Janir shuddered. "The size of a rabbit!" "A rat!" Amilla snapped. "You screamed like that for a rat." "It was a big rat," Janir countered, "with little clawed feet." Only after she said it did she realize how silly it sounded. "Bloody hell, I thought you were being attacked or something," Amilla muttered. "I was." "By the rat," Janir mumbled, feeling more the fool with each passing moment. "You're 100 times its size. You could kill it with one bare hand. Now go back to sleep and don't wake me unless it's a real emergency." Amilla snatched up the blanket Janir had thrown away. She offered it back, but Janir shook her head. She didn't want it after the rat had been crawling on it. "Then mind if I keep it?" Without waiting for a response, Amilla took Janir's discarded blanket and went back to her bunk. Janir wasn't sure if fear of the rat or the fact she was now much colder was to blame for her restlessness after that, but either way, she couldn't sleep for the remainder of the night. "You're joking," Canacade chortled. "I'm dead serious," Amilla countered. "I thought we were under attack." "It's not that funny," Janir growled. "You panicked over a rodent. It's that funny," Canacade snorted. "All right, that's enough." Cerilius was seldom in a laughing mood. "Stop your giggling. We're nearly there." Janir pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders as they rounded a bend in the street and a gust of icy wind met them. Most of the Slavish soldiers in the buildings and outside around cook fires looked up as they passed. Zamarza had sent word to the Lord Argetallam late last night that she would be ready to test the chalice's powers this afternoon. The Lord Argetallam had sent word to Cerilius early that morning that he wanted the 4 of them present. "She's been working on that infernal thing for less than 24 hours and she's ready to test it. Then she says that it still won't be ready to spell the army for another 2 weeks. Cerilius muttered under his breath. "I'm sure if you asked her, she'd be delighted to give you an explanation." Canacade's coppery complexion had mostly paled, save for his nose, which had gone red in the cold. Even that didn't stop his cheeky grin. "If I want magical schooling, I'll claim an enchanter," Cerilius retorted. They came to the same mansion they had visited yesterday. Janir could already feel the burning hot magic of the chalice, angry and writhing. The flare of Zamarza's magic was close by, along with the black light of Argetallams. The guards at the side entrance didn't question their group once they showed their carcatan. Cerilius led the way through the echoing hall, the other 3 in single file behind him. Janir wondered how marvelous these halls and galleries must have been when their pillars were polished and their floors carefully tended. They were still impressive, but... "And here we are," Cerilius quietly announced, stopping at a thick oaken door with cast iron hinges and 2 Slavish guards on either side. The guards waved them inside when they again showed their carcatan. The chamber had a high domed ceiling of alabaster panes. The narrow, floor-length windows filled with the thinly sliced stone gave the room an auburn glow. Janir couldn't imagine the painstaking craftsmanship that had gone into the roof alone, not to mention the acoustics. Every rustle of Zamarza's skirt could be heard. There was a high dais in the back where Zamarza stooped over the chalice. threading thin bronze wires under the lid with a look of total concentration. Cribs darted around her ankles like an ugly, featherless bird, giving her spools of wire and compliments before she asked for them. She had already threaded dozens of wires around the chalice under the bronze cover, and they were woven together in a web, webbing out about 2/3 of a sword length from the stem. The magic from the chalice had spread out, bits of it twining through the wires. Janir could sense flashes of red and orange like molten steel. Below the dais waited a trio of slavish soldiers who kept on glancing around uneasily. Farther back from the dais stood Lord Strahl Vonmar, with a few attendants, and the Lord Argetallams with Knistrith and Lucan. The prince stood impassively, only casting Janir a sideways glance to acknowledge her at all. Janir slipped in after Cerilius with Canicade and Amilla close behind. The Lord Argetallams acknowledged them with a glance as they took their place beside him. He was so removed, Janir often wondered if she had done something to offend him. They stood there for a long time, no one speaking as the enchantress fiddled with the wires and the 3 slavish soldiers fidgeted. Lord Strahl drummed his fingers on the wall with impatience, and someone coughed. Janir ached to shift position, but none of the other Argetallams so much as twitched. "And we're ready," Zamarza announced triumphantly, straightening her back and rising to her feet. "I think I'll use the magic to weave the rest of the bronze web. It'll have to be much bigger than this to spell an entire army. I'll need some cedar boughs as well, the branches of trees that have seen at least one eclipse, preferably 2. "Just test the damned spell already, woman," Strahl bellowed. "You've had us waiting here for nearly an hour." "Patience, my pet," Zamarza crooned, not intimidated at all. "Soon enough. Now let me think." Strahl growled wordlessly and glared at Zamarza, his hand fisted around the edge of his fur mantle, knuckles paling. "Ah, yes." The enchantress spoke a long string of rhythmic verses in a flowing, musical language Janir had never heard before. At least, Janir didn't remember having heard it before. That didn't mean much. The wires began to glow. The light increased until the entire room was illuminated with bronze. The magic inside sizzled and writhed, eager for direction, any direction. Zamarza continued chanting in that musical language, and Janir made out the faintest ringing from the chalice. Light came from the relic and the wires until it was nearly blinding, and then everything stopped. The light stopped, the faint ringing stopped, and Zamarza's chant stopped. Janir looked around expectantly. Everything looked as it had before Zamarza had said her spell. "Is that it?" Strahl folded his arms across his chest. "That's it." If Zamarza noticed his impatience, she gave no sign. There was a hesitant silence. Janir cringed as the irate magic bloomed from seemingly nowhere. It blossomed and grew, expanding and overtaking the soldiers' bodies like unstoppable weeds. She bit her lip as it covered them completely, infecting every bone, vein, and muscle, permeating every organ. Then one of the soldiers piped up. "I don't feel any different." Regardless of how he felt, magic saturated every fiber of his body. Janir had no doubts. "Yes, how do we know if it worked?" another asked. Zamarza rolled her eyes and marched up to the nearest soldier and plunged a hunting knife into the man's breast. Janir involuntarily jumped. She hadn't even seen where it had come from. Strahl reached to stop her, but it was too late. The other 2 soldiers Zamarza had spelled gasped and jumped back while their companion stared wide-eyed and open-mouthed at the hilt of the blade protruding from his chest. For a moment, Janir thought that the man was dying, but the writhing enchantment within his body took over, sealing the wound and encircling the blade.
I can't even feel it,
he gasped.
Then it worked,
Zamarza smirked.
I knew it. My mistress never fails,
Cribs squeaked, clapping with glee. Everyone ignored him. Zamarza yanked her knife from the soldier's chest. Blood dripped from the blade, but other than that, the soldier didn't bleed at all. Janir could see the enchantment close the wound from the inside out, not so much repairing the damage as filling it. Impressive, the Lord Argetallams remarked.
It rather is, isn't it?
Zamarza agreed.
Oh well, you've all seen that it works. I just have to remove the spell and get to work on creating a physical medium to channel the raw power, and... We don't need a lecture on your witchcraft, Strahl snapped. If you don't want to hear one, I suggest you leave,
Zamarza retorted. Zamarza flicked her wrist to release the enchantment over the 3 Slavish soldiers. It appeared that enchantments were easier to end than create, like building a sandcastle rather than just knocking one over. There was a brief ringing, the light in the men vanished, and then they were toppling to the ground, limp and lifeless. The one Zamarza had stabbed was bleeding out on the stone, but the other 2 didn't have a mark on them.
What is the meaning of this?
Strahl demanded. Zamarza just shrugged.
Did you forget some part of the incantation? Or do you just enjoy watching bodies fall?
The Lord Argetallams eyed her suspiciously.
Zamarza's nostrils flared. The chalice's immortalizing ability makes the spelled subject completely dependent, and once the spell is removed, the subject's body is unable to resume normal life support function. And what does that mean in the common tongue? Hissed Strahl. It means that once you are spelled with the chalice, you are immortal. You don't even need to eat, drink, or sleep. But you die if the spell is ever removed,
Zamarza retorted.
Why did you not mention this earlier?
Strahl took a step toward her, shoulders rigid and hands fisting at his sides.
It's too late for you to back out now,
Zamarza explained.
You've made promises to too many, and you can't appear weak or indecisive now, can you? Especially with your father so aged.
Strahl glared at Zamarza.
These are my countrymen. You think I will risk their pointless slaughter?
You're leading them into war, aren't you?
Zamarza shrugged. I wonder if one of your brothers wouldn't be more flexible. You deceived me, Strahl roared. Perhaps, but the enchantment doesn't have to be lifted. Besides, have you ever considered what would happen if your men ever got it into their heads that immortal armies need no general?
Strahl went quiet, glowering at the woman. The Lord Argetallams took control, raising his voice so that everyone could hear. No one speaks of what happened here. If the soldiers know, they will revolt. All they need to know is that they won't die in battle. Janir thought it brutal, possibly condemning a good portion of your own soldiers to death because it was easier to do that than actually fight the war. But she didn't say anything because she knew that nothing she said would make a difference.
Can you keep the spell from killing anyone until after Brevia is conquered? Strahl demanded. If you want your payment, you had better.
Zamarza smiled, her teeth like pearls.
Trust me.
You have been listening to Broken Enchantments, written and read by Elizabeth Wheatley. Don't forget to check out my Patreon for early access to episodes, bonus content, and lots of patrons-only freebies. You can learn more at elizabethwheatley.com. And don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or YouTube. I'll see you next time.